Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special mini-sode or mega-sode, depending on what we do here, a weekly manga recap.
We played a game, Nick. The
Yeah.
game was what would be like a I'm trying to think of what like a kid's game that would be equivalent to what happened. You could be the old school game of how long can you play on the phone or how long can you play on a computer before your mom's like, I need to use the phone. and then you get shut off of your Splatterball tournament on AOL.
I'd never played that one personally,
Aw.
but I will take your word that it was a thing that existed.
It was absolutely a thing that existed. I can guarantee you that. Question mark? Yeah,
Okay.
there were numerous issues that arose on Wednesday when we normally record our episode, and as a result of it, we had to delay things. I had a power outage in my area, and I was without power for a little bit, but then I was without internet until the morning, which led me to an amusement point to entertain myself. I went to my Blu-ray collection, and I was like, all right, let's see what we got here. I got some decent Blu-rays, but I was like, you know what? Back in 2016, I think, when I was still playing Hearthstone, there was a deal at one point where if you bought the Warcraft
Oh my
movie, you got Hearthstone packs. And I bought the DVD or the Blu-ray and never watched it, ever. So I was like, you know what? What other time am I really going to have for this? So I watched the Warcraft movie and I was like,
all right, what's your 5 years late review then?
you know, I bet I had some. I hope I opened some pretty sweet cards out of those packs because that really, for a very long, for a while, it was almost kind of the point of having the movie was to be like, and here's my Warcraft movie I've never watched because I bought it for the Hearthstone packs that came with it.
And now it doesn't even have that going for it.
Nope, those packs are gone. I don't know what I even got from them anymore, and now it's just a pretty mediocre movie. Look, you can tell a lot of love's put into it, but man, oh man, it is painful to watch. You're like, this is very slow and very nerdy, and I know this lore, and I still think this is nerdy and lame.
And meanwhile, you informed me that your power is out, and I was like, all right, I'll do this. I can do it. Oh. I'm sick.
You're trudging forward one step at a time. You're ready.
And I am feeling a lot better than I was a couple of days ago. But even today, like I slept for much longer than I normally sleep, and I'm still not feeling great. But we are here to talk about people that were in much worse situation than us. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that.
Let's start from the beginning when we talk about the series.
The Big Bang happened. And,
right.
Oh, no, you didn't want to go back that far.
I mean, we could.
Okay.
So
we're going to be here a bit.
Thousands of things, that countless universes, countless galaxies, countless solar systems and stars and planets form, but only one is host to the human race, as far as we know. And eventually, a guy writes a manga called Alice in Borderland.
Yes.
Haro Aso is the author and illustrator of this series. It ran between November 2010 and March 2016 in Shonen Sunday S, and then Weekly Shonen Sunday. And this is a series that I believe that when I named it for a recommendation, that I kind of noted that it was sort of Gantsy.
I misheard you too, and for a while I thought this was done by the person who did Gantz, and I was like, they really toned things down a little bit. This is much less aggressively horny than Gantz was.
And also, I mean, there's definitely a lot of cruelty and pointless death in it, but not nearly as much as...
Not to the same degree, certainly, yeah.
It's, I guess that it's really a lot of those series that are in line. I think that Battle Royale battle royale rather popularized this of people just wind up in a situation where a bunch of them are going to die. There is this mysterious incident that happens in Japan where this kid, this like college age kid named Arisu, which is like a reverse romanization of Alice. So there's where the title comes from.
Oh, we'll get to that. We're gonna get to that at some point.
We'll talk about that eventually, and also we'll talk about how Arisu was the only one that I caught the first time round.
you had to catch Hatter.
No, honestly,
wow.
I didn't.
Okay.
I don't know why, but I just didn't catch that. But so look, I've been we'll talk about the Alice in Wonderland references in this, but I've been reading Red Hood for the past 6 weeks, and compared to that, this is subtle. Okay?
Yeah.
So Arisu and a couple of his friends wind up in Tokyo, but there's nobody around. And it turns out that eventually there are some people around, but like a lot of the population is just gone, and they don't really know what the hell has happened. However, they end up stumbling into these games, which are games of life and death. If you pass them, then you get to survive, and if you don't, then you die. And you have to participate in these games because at stake in each of them is a playing card, a very traditional ace through 10. And eventually then later the face cards, spades, clubs, diamonds, hearts. And the higher the value of the card, with ace being the lowest, the more that it is worth. It acts as a visa for everyone who wins the game, and they are allowed to survive that number of days. And if you don't participate in a game before your visa runs out, you die. If you die in the game, you die. If you kill people, they die. And why are people?
What the fuck was that from? If you kill people, then they die. Isn't that from something?
That's from an anime.
Yeah.
People die when they are killed, and
something
there's
like
a lot of variations to that. Yeah. So, Arisu, it's up to Arisu and the people that he encounters to try and survive in these games, and that's really kind of it. It's really just about encountering different characters and whether or not you want them to survive or die, depending on if you like them or not. And it turns out eventually that there may or may not be a purpose to the Borderland that they are in, what it is. There is an element of testing humans' morality, but that doesn't seem to necessarily be the ultimate purpose of it. And because of the way that the series builds up to its conclusion and then concludes, it doesn't ever really feel like it's a nice, complete package, and you really just kind of have to draw your own conclusion from it.
Well, there's deliberately some things left unanswered, and that's honestly the theme of this series is the answer. It is something that is chased essentially from the beginning until all the way at the very end. And we won't get into that right now because that's honestly kind of the big spoiler of the series is what is the answer. But I will say, to describe this series, the first thing I would use to describe it is Saw. This is very much like Saw, where the games are the draw to it. You want to see the weird games that these characters are put into, and then the games themselves sometimes have, as you mentioned, sort of like a morality aspect to it or a trick to it that you don't notice or something like that. And there's a theme of like, oh, these games all have a winnable solution, but sometimes they might come at different costs, and all the games have different categories in them for different categories, and some innately pitch you up against others more than others might, and things like that. And also, I guess if you need a manga example, is like a little bit like Batum, which is a series I don't think a ton about, but as I was reading this, I was like, yeah, you and Batum would you definitely hang out. You definitely flirt a little bit. I don't think you'd get married, but you would have a short fling for a couple months before both of you realized you're too much of the codependent one in the relationship, and it would never work out because you would never be able to strike a balance. And I think this series had an interesting trajectory with me, because at the start I hated it. Like, I truly thought this was just boring. Like, I couldn't get into it. The characters weren't interesting. And I feel like I had just read too many of these sorts of series before in the past.
Sure.
But around the time, probably the second game, the tag game, and I think maybe it's a hide and seek game that actually did it, I was like, all right, this series so far is relatively inoffensive, and it's just interesting enough that I want to read how these things end. So I was starting to kind of get into a momentum with it. Then about a little bit further on, I started running out of steam, because there is a point where this manga has one of the weirdest, like, chapter sequential orders of a series I've ever read, because it'll be like,
I agree. Yeah.
It'll be like 4 chapters, and then it'll be like side story.
Yeah.
And the side story will be longer than the last fucking story that was in the manga. And it'll sometimes involve characters who are not characters we know. So you're just reading new people, and you don't know what context this is meant. Like, they're just opportunities to basically show more games, essentially.
Yeah. And I mean, I had the same issue at certain points. Like, there is a point where we are introduced to a side character who becomes important to the main story later, and it turns out, oh, he and Arisu were participating in this one game when he was introduced to the Borderlands.
It's interesting you say that, because that he is involved in the plot in that he's introduced in the side story to then be relevant in another side story, which at that point, isn't it the fucking plot? At that point, is it the side story anymore if they're all involved in the same goddamn story?
Like, there's a bunch of different characters they're introduced in the side story, and they become relevant to how they take down one of the face cards. But one of the face cards involves entirely characters that you're not familiar with and that aren't relevant to the plot after that point beyond taking one of the face card guys down. But then there will also be side stories that are like, this is how Chishiya was introduced into the games, and this is the first task that he underwent, and why he had that gun in the first task. But so I had the same problem with, yes, you're totally right that, like, the main purpose of them is to have more games, but some of them suffer from, why do I care about what happens to any of these people?
There's one specific one, the Jack of Hearts scenario.
I hated the way that played out.
That you're just sitting there and you're like, what the fuck is the point of this? Because it's I think like 6 chapters long or something
Really
like that.
long.
It's like the length of most of these arcs, and it doesn't involve any characters you know. It also doesn't involve one of the face, like, it involves one of the face characters, but not one of the kings or of, like, you know, the 4 representatives of that category who we meet earlier on. He's just a random mook, essentially. And you read through the whole thing, and it's just an introduction to 2 new characters who could thematically play into the lore of the world, but are not plot relevant characters. They do not get involved with the story going forward.
Right. They're kind of set up as if they're going to show up in the series' short sequel manga, but then don't. So
yeah. Well, it also should be noted this manga has a couple spin-offs as well.
Yes, it does.
And I don't know if they're not involved in any. I only read the one. I read Retry, which is like a very, very short story. It's basically like one game, essentially. But they are not involved in that at all. I thought maybe they were introducing those characters there because they were going to be antagonists sort of involved in the last game, but they're not. The last game happens and they sit there fucking drinking wine and shit like that and philosophizing. It's just
we're
like,
so evil.
Yeah, like, what am I reading? Who cares? So they're definitely reached a point where I was like, all right, I'm kind of getting overdone on these games, because a lot of the times when it moves to a new story, it's just to show off the new game. And I'll be honest, it's like a 50-50 as to whether or not I'll actually enjoy it. Like, certain games, I'm like, oh, that's clever. I like that. You did good things. And there's other ones where like, watch them play Mahjong. And I'm like, no, I'm out. I'm tuned out. I'm gone. I'm sorry. It's a great game, I'm sure, but this is not interesting to me. You didn't do anything cool with this. It's just Mahjong and someone dies when they lose.
Yep, pretty much.
But then at the end, I have another turnabout. But we'll get to that, I guess, as we get more into actual spoilers.
Right, so I guess we should start off with this series really kind of tries to go for a big, uh, I guess, surprise death kind of thing, as in, oh, this is a place where everyone can die, but then a couple of games in, it's like, no, 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 I meant it. Like, anyone can die. Here, these three characters that looked like they were going to be part of the main cast, and they're all dead now
Yes.
because Arisu and his two close friends that he gets stuck into the Borderlands with, alongside a girl that they meet very quickly, and like there are things that are like going on between the four of them that look like they could potentially play out in the future, uh, and instead they get put into a game where they're told all of you have to basically participate in a really weird version of tag where only one person is going to survive this, and Arisu is the one who survives because after they turn on each other for a little bit, the other three decide we we need to let Arisu live, and so they do. And Arisu through the rest of the series is just kind of like, I need to believe that my friends died for a reason. I've got to carry on in their name, and I've got to figure out why they died. I've got to figure out why all this happened, and he carries that burden along with him. That was, by the way, we should note that one of the big things of the series that is, for the most part, consistently represented is that the four different suits decide the type of game that is played.
Yes.
Spades are physically involved. Diamonds are intellectual games. Hearts are psychological battles. And clubs are denoted as a balance. But in reality, they're mostly just like, work together or you'll all die.
Yeah.
So, so hearts are the most cruel because they deliberately try and make the players turn on each other, and that's what happens in the game of tag, is that because they are all basically told only one of you is going to survive, that is why only one of them survives. If they had taken a bit of time to think about it, maybe they would have figured out a solution that would have allowed all of them to live. And that's kind of how all the heart games are put forward from that point on, is Arasu's like, okay, there is a key to this, there is a trick to this that would allow literally everyone to live. Which I don't think there's a single heart game that actually happens where everyone lives. But
No, well, it's they say that, but the way the heart games actually, like, the notion is that yes, there is a trick for that most of these would work if everyone was super communicative and figured things out. But there are also heart games that are like super like there's one where it's like you're basically outside of a building on a scaffolding and you have to get
yes.
raised up by answering questions. And if you ever, it's like pick the majority or the minority. If you ever pick the minority for the answer and you're wrong, you instantly die. So, and then the questions start getting ludicrously hard. So there's ones where you're like, I don't know, it seems pretty likely someone might die in that one. Or the Jack of Hearts one that we talked about, which was deliberately the dealer of the game, the person controlling, or citizen, I guess at that point, controlling the game is involved with it. You have to figure out who they are and make them die. And you're like,
Yeah.
well, that's super easy to like someone else, someone innocent to get kind of hit with the shrapnel in that essentially. So like, it seems like it actually is like a pretty, it's one of those things that sounds good in premise, but I don't know how real it honestly is.
Yeah.
And there is sort of an interesting dynamic in the way that, similar, I guess, to like Saw games, that like there is always supposed to be an answer. I believe haven't watched really the Saw movies, but I've listened to a lot of people talk about them, read the Wikipedias and stuff like that. And it sounds like it's a big thing that it's like you always had to have a solution.
Twist. Yeah.
And I remember there being a thing that one person who was the Saw person stopped giving actual ways to win puzzles, and then they had to get punished because that's not what the Saw games are about. And that's more or less how these games work.
In the vengeful serial murderer business, we have a very firm set of rules that we adhere to at all
I will
times.
set up a reverse bear trap on a person's cock so it'll explode their scrotum out into their face if they don't need a pile of diarrhea. But I have honor, sir. And that's kind of how most of these work, but there's also some that are like a lot of diamond games I found are simply just 4 or 5 people walk into a room and one of them will leave because the other ones are going to have to die, which is one of those things where you're like, all right, this sort of doesn't blend with some of the themes we'll get into later on in the story, but, and this is what I've had to do for a lot, because there's a lot you have to kind of make your own judgment call on. The way I've started to rationalize it is we later find out there's kind of a person in charge of each category of games, and
Yes.
maybe you could justify that the person in charge of Diamond Games is more interested in like sort of a person emerging fairly as a winner of the game and not so much in let's do cooperative stuff, because as I said, most Diamond games we see tend to be head-to-head matchups. Now I say that I think we are only introduced to like one Diamond game at the start, which is like a fucking light bulb puzzle, and then
Yeah.
all of the other ones we see are fucking the quote unquote Cheshire Cat just playing fucking games. So I don't know.
Yeah, all the diamond stuff was probably the stuff that I was the least into. The light bulb puzzle, by the way, is like an actual like thought puzzle that like people. I remember having it proposed to me a long time ago. So when that one showed up, I was like, oh, wait, I actually remember this one. So that's nice that it's not like just this weird bullshit thing that got thought up. It's like,
Yeah.
no, that's an actual thing that people think about. Some, use as a puzzle example sometimes.
Nick would have helped us get out of that puzzle, and then I assume we would have immediately walked into one of the bad games after that and all got killed. Nick, that'll be your specialty. Every fucking time you show up in the manga, it's gonna have your name and a little diamond underneath your name to show that that's your specialty. And I like that Arisu's specialty is hearts, and he had played one heart game and all of his friends died in it, and they're like specialty hearts. So I was like, I guess. I don't really know if that was a victory for him.
Yeah, I guess he did solve the 10 one, but I mean,
But even before that, his specialty was still listed as hearts. It was after he played 3 games, 1 clubs, 1 spade, and heart, and he lost all of his friends in the heart game.
good job winning that one.
I'm a master. I miss him so lonely.
Oh god. So Arisu goes through this, and it falls into this like depressed state for a bit, but fortunately he's found by someone that he met in one of the previous games that he solved, Usagi, whose name means rabbit because she's the white rabbit and Arisu is Alice. And there's I think like 5 or 6 characters total who adhere to that naming convention of a reference to Alice in Wonderland.
I picked out 5, and I might have been missing them. Some of them I didn't even pick up on. There's Alice, Usagi is the white rabbit. There's a little Queen of Hearts. There's a character just called Hatter, and then Shinyasa, whatever his name is, the Cheshire Cat, supposedly. Shishia. I physically cannot see it, but
well, his name sounds like Cheshire.
I know. So but I'm like,
I don't know.
But I just want to address the Alice in Wonderland theming on this series is very paper thin, because I was because there was a point where I was like, is there no Cheshire Cat in this manga? And I was like, I guess that one dude is the Cheshire Cat, except he is nothing like the Cheshire Cat is defined by like an illogical attitude and being mad and everything like that, and this dude is strictly logical in everything he does. So it's not a good blend between the two.
And also there is Dodo, because he's like a dodo. The dodo bird shows up in Alice in Wonderland.
Oh wow! So, okay, no, I did not.
Honestly, like I literally once I realized, oh right, Usagi means rabbit, and then I started like, and oh right, the final villain is the Queen of Hearts. Then I started like looking for more, and I was like, well, no wonder I didn't pick these out, because there's only a couple of them,
and there are a fraction of the characters in the manga. It's not like you're like, oh, all the important. You're like, no, there's nothing for Kuina, there's nothing for Agni, there's nothing for the King of like all these very important. I was like trying to think. I was like, is there like a blazed out character who's like was supposed to be the caterpillar or something like that? And I was like, technically there was.
Hold on. Maybe I am stretching this. So I was thinking that like, okay, certain characters that are paired with them, maybe that's the one to look for. But like, yeah, Kuina has nothing to do with it, and she is kind of paired up with Chishiya for a little bit of the series. So I am stretching on this one. Hatter and Agni, whom he calls Mori-chan, sounds a tiny bit like March. Like the March Hare.
Yeah, and he's very much like that, you know.
Oh yeah, you can just see him sitting around a table being crazy.
I will say the closest to anything it actually gets, I thought, was Hatter resides over what is essentially an eternal party, and I was like, all
Yeah.
right, I kind of get that, but beyond that, everything else is straight up just like thematic stuff. Essentially, it's as much as like, Oda naming his characters after famous pirates, being like, oh no, this isn't a fantasy, this is a historical drama. Like these are all, this Hawkins is just like the real life Hawkins, like, no,
Sure.
it's very silly and just kind of a naming convention and theme over the top of the manga.
I mean, you can definitely draw a lot more between the themes of Alice in Wonderland and the themes of Alice in Borderland than you can between the individual characters that are supposed to be named between them. Because
to a certain extent, although I think because of I'm gonna butcher this word now. I fuck it. Specificity.
yes,
Yeah, because of the specificity of what our Alice in Borderland's theme is, it's almost something where you're like, yeah, I guess it is connected with, Alice in Wonderland's major themes of like identity and self-discovery, except this one is much more narrow and focused at what it's trying to answer, as opposed to, the greater answer, just like, who am I?
Yeah. Alice in Wonderland is a lot. It's hard to theme something after Alice in Wonderland because it's too druggy.
Yeah.
To be
That's a good way to describe it.
So I'm not gonna. It is just kind of weird because you notice those parallels and you're like, well, are there any more? No. But then some of them come up and like the last thing that happens is that Arisu has to play croquet with the Queen of Hearts. You're like, hold on a second. Was there themes between everything before this? Hold on.
I'm like,
which one is the mock turtle?
I had to stop for a moment. I was like, when you think about it, the tag game is also a lot like eating mushrooms to change your size. And like, I really started having to stretch to make it happen.
Oh no, yeah, that's the scaffolding game where you go up and down.
Yeah. I like how I did check out the Wikipedia, or the wiki rather, for Alice in Borderland at one point, because I was just trying to remind myself of some of the games. And it was a reminder, like, the Three of Clubs is the first game they run into, and I guess the Three of Clubs is the first card that is seen in Alice in Wonderland. And they're like, yet again, another similarity between the two. And I was like, I guess. I don't really know. Like, this is like your big fucking ace in the hole. Like, gotcha. We're 1 for 1.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk, I guess, about...
Do we want to get to spoilers?
Yeah, I think that we have to.
Okay.
Because everything after the point where Adusu's friends die feels like one long blur to me, in terms of like, this is where things just like get serious, and then you learn a little bit more about how things work, and then it ends. So after that, Arisu meets, well, he doesn't meet, but he re-encounters Usagi, and Usagi can't really just let him just die. Yeah. So she befriends him and shows him how to survive in this world, because she's got survival skills because she is a climber. So she's used to being out in the wilderness and looking after herself. And so the two of them work together, and they learn about this place called Beach, which they think is, which, by the way, the fact that it's not called Tea Party. It's just called Beach.
Nick, it's because everyone has to wear swimsuits, which for the ladies means bikinis, and for the guys, it's like shirts and whatever. Who gives
anything you want?
Sure, that's swimwear, I guess. Fucking jeans.
So, turns out that there are a lot more people that have been transported to the Borderlands than initially appeared. It's just that a pretty sizable number of them have joined this organization called Beach under their cult leader, Hatter, who has decided that he knows the solution to everything. He doesn't have any better of an idea than anyone else, but he is charismatic and projects confidence, and so people follow him.
Yeah, he basically states eventually through like a flashback that he's like, if I don't give the people something to believe in, they're going to be lost and crazy. So
Yeah.
I will be their leader and give like an order to this, and then starts to buy into his own bullshit by the end.
So he declares everyone like that the way to get back to Japan is to gather all of the playing cards that they are being rewarded as visas. And so they have this big old freaking marker board and they're marking them off as they gather them. And eventually someone kills Hatter. And this appears to be the impetus for the reveal of the final unsolved game, which is the Ten of Hearts, the most difficult, intense, psychological game. And it turns out that it is very much meant by the people running the game to just get rid of all these assholes who have been working together, essentially. And it's basically a murder mystery game where once you find the person responsible for killing another person, this girl who turns up having a knife in her stomach, once you burn their body on the pyre, then the game ends and in victory. And there's a time limit, of course. Arisu figures out that Hatter's friend Agni is deliberately making everyone kill each other because he's the one who actually killed Hatter in a moment of paranoia, and he believes that Beach is a corrupting influence who made his friend crazy, and so he also wants to die.
Yes.
So, okay, but
it's one of the ones that has a clever solution to it because they're like, look, the person who started this is the one who killed themselves. If you guys had just talked this out, there was literally a forensic investigator among you who figured out that she killed herself pretty easily with just a few minutes of investigative work.
Yeah, there was a panic in the building going on, and everyone was running around killing each other. She was like, I figured it out.
Yeah, it's a reverse script. Only she could have killed herself. Boom, throw her body on the pyre. All of us get to live. But because everyone's kind of predisposed to suspicion, they just start killing each other. Because the one force that is strongest in it is a crazy military force full of mostly insane people, by the way.
Yes.
Full of one dude who just calls himself the last boss and walks around murdering people, and a guy who's a disgusting freak who for some reason just keeps on living in this manga.
I don't get what Niragi's deal is. Let's talk about this. So it turns out that Beach is where we are introduced to a lot of the supporting cast in this series. There is the forensic specialist who kind of just disappears for a lot of this.
Yes.
I think she's just too smart to be in the rest of the series.
Well, Nick, it's because there were only so many times for games where being smart mattered, and they just gave all of them to the fucking Cheshire Cat. So
Shishiya turns out is part of this because he's like launches this whole scheme to like get the playing cards for himself, and he betrays Arisu and Usagi to do it. We are introduced to Kuina, the best character in the series.
Yes.
And then we're introduced to all of Agni's militant asshole people, one of whom is a guy who has a katana and just tattoos himself, and it turns out that he has found purpose in the games because he was a loser in real life. Kuina kicks his ass, and he dies.
Good.
In fashion that he would probably be happiest with. And then there is Niragi, who is just an insane asshole.
Yeah.
He was bullied when he was outside of the games. I feel bad for him, which is why it's okay for him to take an Uzi and gun down countless people and try and rape Usagi, and then he gets burned by this homemade flamethrower that Shishiya whips up and falls off a building and then just comes back and keeps on sticking around. And then when he gets shot at the end, they're like, we need to finish the game so that he will live.
We're going to get to this eventually when we get to like the very end of the series, but he is one of the most interesting characters, and you're just like how he applies to sort of the end theme and what it means to like leave the Borderlands. And you're just like, how the fuck did this unredeemable cocksucker. Like, make it so long. And so many fucking other good people had to die as a result of this.
Yeah. So I mentioned her before, and I think that this is one of the things that kept me going in this series was if you catch on to certain people, you will want to see what happens to them. So Usagi, I liked Usagi. I thought that she was, fun and cool, and I liked how, self-assured she was. However, at this exact point in the story, she and Arisu become love interests, and she becomes far less interesting.
I was gonna say, they maybe have the least amount of chemistry I've seen between two characters who are supposed to be romantically into each other that I've ever seen in a manga. These characters, I was like, there is fucking not a single spark flying when these two characters are interacting with each other.
My problem with it was that she just stopped being cool and independent. Yeah. She becomes just something for Arisu to save.
Yeah, she becomes, ironically, because she's a mountain climber, she just becomes a hanger-on in the rest of his story, basically. And it's also frustrating because so much of Arisu's story is Arisu encounters a new game, and he's usually good at figuring things out, so he can't do that or else the story, like, the game is solved and it loses, all interest, so he has to have kind of an event, despair horizon. He has to kind of reach this point where he's like, oh no, and then she'll kind of have to help pull him out of it, or she's the reason why he's kind of having a despair moment, because it's just like, oh, our relationship isn't going very well, then what's the point of anything? Like, it's just one of those things. And they repeat it so often throughout the series. I should say so often, because he's actually only involved in like 4 games, now that I really think about it, after the very start. But yeah, it is just this thing where he can't solve every game immediately, so eventually they just reach a point where they're like, I don't know, what if he just fucking fumbles around not knowing what to do for like 20 minutes and then has to figure it out in the last chapter or whatever, and that's kind of what happens. And that
what if he stumbles ass over tea kettle into winning the final game because he's too much?
Man, I want to get to the final game.
Okay, we'll talk about it. Then, so Chishi is we get to learn more and more about him at this point. He's the smart asshole character, and honestly, he's just not that impressive for huge chunks of the story. You're supposed to be like in awe of how smart he is, but honestly, it's one of those things where like the level of stuff that he has to do is so very specific that I can't even tell how he is smart, if you know what I mean.
There was one instance where I actually was impressed. There's actually this was probably my favorite game in the whole series, if only because it was interestingly framed, and it was the poker game, where it's basically 5 people playing poker, and every time somebody loses, they get like, everyone's playing with a noose around their neck, and if they lose all their chips, they're hung, and their body hangs over this, macabre poker match. It just has to continue. And there's a gimmick to it that if anyone is caught cheating, guns will open up in front of everybody, and they'll all have a pistol in it, and you shoot the person who's cheating, basically, and then the game will continue. But, Cheshire Cat figures out, oh, hey, we're losing to this one guy, and he just used his gun on somebody else. So he intentionally cheats to get the other person playing to take their gun out and kill the guy who's in the lead, because there's no choice otherwise. So he plays like a big gambit, but kind of relies on the notion of just like, yeah, we're both going to take this person out, and then afterwards you won't have a gun, so I kind of automatically win at that point.
Right. I can cheat as much as I want, and you can't cheat.
Yeah, it's a very interesting move, and it was one that was clever. But again, this is why I have a big problem with him being the Cheshire Cat. I was like, I guess you could say it's such a bold move, it's madness, but otherwise it is something he has strictly thought through very carefully, which feels like the antithesis of the Cheshire Cat.
And then there's like the final game that he plays in where I was like, that's lame. So
yeah, that was another one that's like, all right, it's kind of interesting scene, because when we do start to meet I'll just call them the kings. When we meet them, they have interesting philosophies that do kind of put the way you view some of the games you've seen in their category to this point in a different lens. That's why we said, like, Diamond games seem to favor someone coming out ahead through action and that's why one person comes out ahead, because it's based on the person who believes there should be fairly one winner. Whereas the clubs game is a balance game that everyone should be able to get out of, because the person who plays it has a team of friends with him, and he would want all of his friends to be able to escape these games. And no one gives a shit about the Spade guy.
he's crazy.
That's why he had that fucking baseball diamond game that is without a doubt the most unfair game in the whole fucking series. It's like, come to this baseball stadium. Hey, what's that? Kaboom! 99% of the participants are dead.
All right, how do I make this game more lopsided? The guy who's it and is wandering around has an Uzi. Okay.
Oh, all right. I want to go back to this real quick. So there's a lot of thought put into these games, and some of them are very clever. Some of them, though, have moments where you're like, these are the dumbest motherfuckers on the fucking planet playing this game. And the tag game was the first moment I recognized it, because the whole game is it's an apartment complex, and there's a shooter basically. It's tag, but you're tagged with bullets that are gonna just kill you. So watch out for that. And this person is fucking walking around in a trench coat and a big fucking horse head mask, and they're huge. And somebody eventually is like, I know the gun that they're using. And that gun has a 10-second reload to it. Even if you're super fast, it has a 10-second reload. So all we have to do is wait for them to run out of their clip, and then we can jump on them, disable them, and kill them. Just choke them out and just kill them, basically. And we'll be able to survive this game. And
I'm sure he's not carrying anything else in his trench coat.
No, the big twist is a second gun. And you're like, I cannot... I would already be panicked if someone came up to I think we can catch this guy. I'd be like, that's insane. He has a gun, and they're like,
good luck with that. I'll be over here.
You don't understand. There's a 10-second window where he has to reload. And,
you have fun in those 10 seconds. I'll be over here.
No matter how much I was hoping that this is going to be an answer, there was no way I wouldn't ask. But what if he has a second gun? Because clearly he's in a giant trench coat. It's like he's fucking walking around butt naked and the gun was hidden up his butthole. He's fucking a giant trench coat. He can have thousands of guns under there.
Oh my god. Yeah, there's a lot of moments where people just die because they're stupid. Because you need to have people who demonstrate the consequences of not thinking through the game in very gratuitous manner. There are also times where clearly the person who designed this game was just fucking trolling people. I have been watching, and I've finished watching it, the Netflix adaptation of this series. And they move some stuff around a few different times. Like the first game is very different. The second game has a couple of different characters involved in it. Then they use one of the side story missions as Arisu's big getting back on his feet moment before they investigate Beach, which is the bus mission from one of the side stories.
Runaway, I think it's called, or something like that.
Right. Where it turns out the solution was the goal is actually the bus that you start off in the entire time. And they completely changed the way that unfolds. So it takes away one aspect of, you would have passed if you had just looked out for all of your teammates and stayed here. But it does add the benefit of these are characters that you actually care about that are participating in it. And also it has a much cooler means that they solve it, which is that they actually get the bus running and and all sorts of stuff. So there are a lot of differences in it. And some of the differences in the Netflix series, I think, make it much more fun to watch than this series was to read. So if you're listening to talk about this, I recommend actually giving that a try and see how you like it before trying to get into the manga. Also, I think Kuina comes across a lot better in the Netflix series than she does in the manga, and I like her already. So.
I would say, did they keep her backstory and everything? Because the reason I like Kuina is because she's a heroic trans character, and there are not a lot of those in manga.
No, she's great.
Okay.
They got a cis female actress for her, but I mean, they did keep the backstory for her.
Okay, that's a good detail then.
Also, with her, they even kept her mom being really awesome about it. So
yeah, all right, there you go then.
Yeah. By the way, yes, as you mentioned, Kuina is a heroic trans female character in this series, and she just kicks ass.
Yeah.
She fights the guy with the sword and beats him barehanded. God, My favorite character in the series was Akane, the girl who is in the baseball
Oh
diamonds
yeah.
game, and who ends up just gritting her fucking teeth and making it out of there, and she ends up having to amputate her leg, and she becomes a badass one-legged archer girl. And I think that is really the only real emotional investment you can get in the series is there someone that you want to see make it out of this and get to the end? Because if you are invested in what Arisu is invested in, which is I want to know the answer, you may wind up being very disappointed. It really depends on how you read the outcome of the series and the way that everything kind of winds down. Because we get to the end, and so we go through the 8 through 10 stuff. Once all 40 of those are completed, then the next stage is revealed. And it turns out that there have been these other people in the Borderlands called dealers who have been kind of running these games, and they are overseen by the residents of the Borderlands who don't have to worry about going through games and earning visas. They are permanent residents, and they were in a previous round of games where at the end of everything, all of the games were resolved, and they were given the option to go back to the normal world or to be residents in the next run of the Borderlands. And they would run the new set of games with their lives on the line if the players win. So it's this constant, repetitive people fighting against each other with their lives on the line. And sometimes people make it back and sometimes people die. So the Queen of Hearts, who has designed presumably the majority of the Hearts games that we have seen to this point, is the final opponent in the series. And everyone has this weird moment where all the people who have survived gather together and they're like, there's one game left. It's the Queen of Hearts. And they decide that only 2 people are going to go in, and they decided through rock, paper, scissors, and Usagi and Arisu go in because they're like, if more people go in, it might just be a way for us to be turned against each other because that's how Hearts games do.
Yeah.
So Arisu goes in, and they're like, okay, you have to face me in 1 full game of croquet. Do I have to win? No. You just have to complete it. And if we complete it, you win. If you don't complete it, then you lose. So they start going through this, and Arisu's like, what is the secret behind the games? And she's like, have some tea.
Have some tea and let's talk philosophy, basically.
And Arisu's like, well, this isn't suspicious at all.
The final game is astonishing because it is dramatically relevant if Arisu and only Arisu plays the game. If anyone else had gone into that stadium, because they don't give a shit about the answer, and they also would not have drank the tea, probably. I think probably 90% of the characters out there would not have drunk the tea. They would have just played the game and it had been over, because there is no hidden gimmick beyond
so long as they don't kill the Queen of Hearts, so she is able to finish. That's basically it.
That's one of her win conditions, is to just piss you off so much you try to kill her, and at which point no one will be able to clear the game won't ever end, and everyone will just die when their visas run out. It's the ultimate like despair game at that point.
So, but the way that she gets this is literally only Arisu would do this, where he would be like, I don't want to finish the game until you tell me what the Borderlands are and who's behind it and what's going on. And she proceeds to troll the shit out of him. There isn't like an entire chapter just dedicated to her saying, in the future, humans have eliminated all disease, have eliminated all war, we have ascended to the stars, we've spread ourselves out across many planets, and then we got bored. So we made a VR simulation where people could actually experience death and experience terror again. And that's what you're doing. You are actually sitting safely in a computer simulator, and you're going to wake up from this when you die. Really? No, I was just kidding.
And then that just lists off like 7 more. Yeah.
She just makes up a bunch of bullshit because ultimately she doesn't know either. She doesn't know what the Borderlands are. But Arisu is so obsessed with learning the answer that he has to try and get it from her. And so he ends up taking this hallucinogenic tea, which causes him to almost fuck everyone over. And he gets snapped out of because Usagi fucking cuts her cardioid artery to shock him out of it. uh, and they win.
It was the romance for the ages, and that's how it's all came together there.
So they solve the last game, and everyone is given the choice to go home or to stay in the games. Two assholes who won a previous game decide, yeah, we want to keep on doing these games because we're crazy. Never see them again. Everyone else goes back home, and it turns out a fucking meteorite hit Japan, and thousands of people were injured. Many of them died, and it turns out that everyone who was knocked unconscious by this meteorite has been sharing a collective unconscious experience, but that also really happened.
So it's a very interesting thing. So essentially, the answer to what is the Borderlands is an elaborate purgatory, because everyone is going there, and whatever happened there kind of is what happened. So if you went to the Borderlands and you died in real life. You got hit by that meteorite, your heart stopped, and you just didn't come back. If you went to the Borderlands and you survived till the end and you chose to come back, then you died for that minute or whatever, and then you come back. Although with one exception, which is Agni, who my justification for that is Agni hasn't learned to forgive himself yet, which is why he hasn't escaped the Borderlands, but he's still in a coma. So, you know exactly how that plays. And then the third option is if you chose to stay in the Borderlands after finishing the game, which those two assholes do, then they probably just die as well because there's never a point for them to escape anyway. And this is, again, an elaborate purgatory. So there's a lot of whatever. It plays to the theme of the story, which is there is no answer. That there is no answer. There is not one collective thing. It simply is. And really, what you're looking for should be your answer. What reason do you have to live, to enjoy life, to give yourself a sense of being and purpose? And that the Borderlands is merely a place to kind of somewhat put a merit-based escape to it. Like that's the thing that's kind of fucking with me in the answer, because it's sort of implied Arisu gets to the end on a merit base because he comes to realize that about himself. He's been searching for this answer, but he doesn't need one. And everyone else has kind of gotten through there by working together and helping each other and reaching the end of this Borderland, except the two insane guys, but sometimes bad people succeed in the world or whatever too. But then it's like, okay, but some people just got stuck into shitty games and died. Yeah. Like, is that merit based as well? And you could say, all right, well, what if it was retroactive? Like, it's simply just some people, they were already going to die. Let's just start with Arisu and his two friends. His two friends were always going to die. So the story of the Borderlands in itself plays out with that having already been decided. That's why the three of them get put in the game where they die, because they were going to. That's irrelevant. But then you find out later that everyone who is managing the games are also people in the Borderlands. It's basically just when you come into it, you are either a player or a dealer. There's no choice involved. It's not a measure based off of who you were in a previous life or anything. There's no moral decision as to who becomes a dealer or not. And the dealers are just fucked. If the players finish the games, they all die. There's no way to avoid that. So it's another one of those things where, like, what's the moral implications there? A couple of the dealers we know were just high school girls who got stuck in a bad situation. Fuck them. Laser beam from space. You're dead. You don't get to come back. Like, it's a very interesting thing where you're trying to figure out what the moral message is. And I guess my eventual takeaway from it is, like, I don't know, be a good person, but sometimes it sucks to suck. And I don't like good people die screaming. I don't know.
It is a tricky thing, because what we are told eventually is that, the whole point of it was humanity doesn't strive to survive. Humanity needs to strive to find a reason to live. And Arisu finds that essentially in Usagi, which is, I have a person to survive for, to want to live with. And we find out eventually that, because we see him after he wakes up from being in the Borderlands, and he is at peace basically with himself. Like the doctor who sees him is like worried that he's going to have survivor's guilt, and he's like, you know what, I think we're going to be okay. And like he goes and he decides that he's going to really live his life. He's just been this shut-in, gamer for his whole life, but now he's like, I'm going to start applying myself. I'm going to go find out what I want to do with my life. And he also, despite not remembering his time in the Borderlands, happens to stumble across Usagi, and the two of them decide to go on a date together, which is probably the most chemistry that they have through the entire
Yeah,
series.
honestly, it is. It bummed me out though, because this is a lot like Lost, in that the final season was all an elaborate purgatory, somewhat, and they also meet two of the characters meet at a vending machine, but in that they get to remember their time together and have a big romantic swing. Whereas this one, they're just like, "Hey, want to go get dinner?" And I was like, "Oh, they don't get to remember. They don't get their big moment." But that actually is very important. They don't get to remember because there's a spin-off that involves what happens with your memories of the Borderlands, in that they are real and they exist in eternity in the Borderlands. So if you would ever return, you will suddenly remember everything about the Borderlands.
Which makes sequels much more convenient to do.
It's so... I really respect the series in its ultimate conclusion, because I think there's a lot of interesting sort of respect to there is no answer. I've always kind of appreciated. Now, I'm also an agnostic atheist. It's a lot more easier for me to justify and make peace with the idea there is no answer, but what answer you come up with yourself. But I do appreciate a series that's basically going to be like, there is no answer. What was more important is what these characters discovered along the way. But then also to say, but we will have spin-offs and sequels to expand upon the lore of the Borderlands. They're like, I thought you just said the Borderlands don't really matter. They're not really that important. Like, yeah, but
but I thought it was a great game for the Joker of Diamonds. Okay.
I got a 7 of clubs that's gonna blow your tits off.
Yeah, but the Netflix series came out, and so I got to do a spin-off to promote it. Okay.
Yeah.
So. I think that I agree with you in terms of, I do like the conclusion the series comes to. 10 years ago, me would have hated that cop-out ass shit, but
I can absolutely see some people who are going to be furious by it. Yeah. Because the final chapter is probably the thing I love the most. The final chapter is just a person interviewing people, being like, what do you, I forget the exact question to get asked, but like, what are you living for? What do you think about life? And it is an entire chapter of people we've never met before, just giving their one sentence explanations for their life's philosophy. And it runs the gamut. Some people are annoyed by the question. Some people are very sad. They're depressed people. Some people seem to have found peace in life. Some people are very casual, but like, it's this wide spectrum of answers. And the manga is saying all of these are valid. And then eventually it closes off on our main characters, like a tease, like, okay, they got together, whatever. And I thought, I was like, wow, that's a fucking beautiful way to end this manga that really ties everything together.
Sequel.
But I can guarantee there are some people who are going to read that chapter and be like, this is fucking bullshit. There was no big last game fight or anything. Like, I don't know. I guarantee there'd just be people who are really upset. Also, we have to go back. All that said, fucking, it really confuses me how Nagari makes it out of the game, because, like, again, if there's some kind of merit base to it, he does technically seem to learn a lesson after getting fucking owned for like the 6th time in the series. But at that, his answer is just like, I guess I won't be as much of a piece of shit. And I was like, all right, I guess this is an upgrade from you being a sexual predator, I guess. I don't fucking know.
Well, but he also has that really, really weird bit where he's dying at one of the points, and he's like, don't you dare judge me.
Oh, yeah.
Because if everyone else in the world was like me, then you would be the one that was called evil. Fuck. Yeah, but that's not the world we live in. Yeah. So just this unrepentant douchebag. And meanwhile, like, can you imagine if, like, their solution for the King of Clubs, I think it was, game, where they have, like, the game of intricate team-based tag, and Hat Boy decides to amputate his own hand and kill himself so that everyone else can win? Or if they had just been like, get over here, Niragi.
Oh, yeah, just fucking donk. Ah! I don't think he had the points. Or no, he did. He also did have the points for it, because he touched one of the poles, so he would have had an extra 10,000. Yeah, we definitely should have done that. I mean, I didn't give a shit about Hat Guy either. Hat Guy was a character who was like, all right, fuck off, dude. Like, in this dream team of fucking Arisu and Kuina and Usagi, it's like, and then we got Hat Guy and the rapist dude. Transphobe and racist guy are here to back you guys up. Like, okay.
Listen, you may disagree with all of our views, but we're here and you need 5 players for the team.
There was a player limit. You guys have to meet the cap.
All right, I guess we're doing this. All right, I guess final thoughts on Alice in Borderland then, because we've been going for a while on this.
Yeah. I will say I thought when I first read this I really was going to dislike it. And about halfway through I thought, I was like, all right, it's entertaining enough to get me through, but I'm not loving it. And then I started to get bored of it. Like, again, I really hate the way the chapter structure works, because all the constant side stories do nothing but kind of infuriate me, because I care so little about half the characters the side stories focus on, and they're very long, that you're like, just make these part of the manga. I don't understand why they're separate. Like, why is this a side story when it's the main fucking story? But the end of it really impressed me, and I really, really enjoyed the way everything kind of came together. I also did read Retry, which is the sequel that we talked about, and I'll just note from it, I like that as well. That was another Hearts game that basically we see Arisu get sucked into, and I don't want to spoil that, since that's not ultimately, I guess, what this podcast is on, but I will say it answers some interesting questions. It carries on the mythology of it, and it is one of the better games as well, because it's another one of those games that has one of those things you realize halfway through, like, oh, we've been playing this wrong, basically. And it poses some interesting thoughts. Also, it's nice to see Arisu became a high school guidance counselor, because he knows a lot about the minds of others and he wants to help kids. So good for him. I came away from this series ultimately liking a lot more. Now, this is not a perfect series. I find this series equal parts fascinating and frustrating, because there's a lot of time where dumb things happen. There are some moments where the manga does feel like it's trying to be a little edgier than it needs to. And I do think there's also just some points where, like, the philosophy of the manga gets kind of muddled and confused. Some of it intentional, I guess, but also at sometimes it just feels kind of annoying to read. But I ultimately enjoyed it. I think it's Silent Hill mixed with Saw, and that sounds kind of awesome, I guess. With like a fucking sprinkling, a Susan of Alice in Wonderland on the top of it to give it a theme. And I dig it. Like, if this obviously now has a Netflix series that's running, if this is something that's going to become some measure of a franchise, then I'm happy for it. Also, this was done by the same guy who did Hide and Closer, which fucked with me the first time I saw it, because I was like, those are two art styles I didn't recognize when placed next to each other. But I did ultimately enjoy this manga. We've read a lot of good manga this year, so I don't know if it would show up on my top list. But it was a lot better than I thought this was going to be 20 chapters into it or whatever.
Yeah, I would say that at the very least, this isn't going to be something that I'll forget next week.
Yes.
There's definitely enough memorable characters and sequences. It does certain things incredibly well. Like we mentioned, Kuina, great character that is honestly the most fun, like, to be around. I liked some of the stuff that happened later on in the series, where Dodo was kind of having his, like, you're my new mom and dad moment with Agni and Akane, because I was like, I would like Akane to be my cool big sister, sure. Agni's killed lots of people though, kid. I don't know if you want to... at certain points it's frustrating, because it really sort of, I think that this series became something that it wasn't at its beginning. I think that a lot of the stuff that came out of this in terms of its outlook on stuff was sort of something that Haruo Aso sort of decided in the midst of creating it, in terms of, like, the philosophy behind it and stuff. And it was probably just originally devised as people play games and they die, because that's, people are really interested in games of death right now, kind of thing. And that really only takes it so far, because it depends on the quality of each individual game and how interesting that it actually is. And like you said, a couple of the early ones are really bad. They're just like, who cares? Like, there's no way to actually, like, solve this. There's, you just have to get lucky, or
Or they're just kind of boring. Like
Yeah.
there's a couple you're just like, all right, whatever. I'm reading this, but whatever.
They're not interesting to observe. Like, if you don't know how freaking mahjong works, then good luck
Oh
with the
man.
whole mahjong side story, because it's nothing but one person going, well, I can't win right now. uh, Beyond that, there are certain characters that are really interesting. There are certain characters that are really frustrating, and then at the end, yeah, it does all come together in a very nice way. But are you going to have it in you to get through this 70 chapter long series, which has all of these various ups and downs that will occasionally be very frustrating to go through? I came out of this, liking it, but I think that if you are interested in the premise, honestly, I have watched the Netflix season. It's a lot easier to just watch it than to read it, especially because it's condensed, and there are certain elements that are made more interesting in the early parts. So that's my recommendation for this manga. Watch
go,
the Netflix series.
go watch TV instead.
Pretty much.
Real quick, what was your favorite game?
Oh gosh, oh god, I'm trying to think. Do you have a favorite game?
I would say the poker game was my favorite just because of that cinematic quality. I really enjoyed the visual of the body, like the hung bodies hanging over this poker game was a very cool visual element. But I guess in terms of one I actually enjoyed, I actually did enjoy the King of Clubs. Like that was a twist I did not see coming, where he shakes hands, transfer the voice, and then you're like, oh, he had a second bracelet on. You're like, that was actually pretty clever.
I knew that the reason he was trying to shake hands was to do that, but I had no idea that was how it was going to work.
Yeah.
I think that was probably one of the best thought out games in terms of how it was designed in the entire series, because some of them were just ridiculous. Like, kill all these animals.
Just kill a shit ton of animals.
And I didn't like the Seven of Spades game. That was the baseball field game, but I really love the way that it plays out.
You like the story of the game, not the game. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, that survival of her just clawing to try to live is great.
And learning more and more about her as she goes along. And then eventually you find out that all the things she's doing is like, no, she's just... I love the note that sequence concludes on, where she's like, I have been living my life up to this point because eventually I want to be the mother and the wife that you never were because you threw your life away. And so I'm going to survive here. And when she's down to her last breath and she's thinking about making the video of herself saying goodbye to her friends and family, she's like, you know what? No, this is a video for the future self, the future me, who is going to have a happy life. You better live your life to the fullest and take advantage of the opportunity that I gave you, and remember that it was because I suffered for you to live. And she just gets up and keeps going. She's so awesome. And then she shows up with an artificial leg, and she's an archer badass. She's great.
It's still one of my favorites. That game's such bullshit.
Hey, did you read the rules? Cool.
Explode. What happened?
And then you find out the king of spades is just like, no, I don't read off the rules.
He's just an asshole. Oh, man.
What a mood whiplash this series makes you go through.
Yeah. All right. Well, we this was essentially over an hour, and the plan was, if we got this long in discussing this manga, we'll probably release this episode separately. Because instead of attaching this on top of the episode we're about to record with Tekking in just a little bit, which would probably already, I'm going to estimate, be like a 2.5 hour long episode, because we're going to be talking about every manga series plus Bleach with a guest, is going to be a very long discussion. We're not going to add an extra hour on top of that and make it a 4-hour episode. So this is a standalone. If you see the short length and you're like, what the fuck's going on? Just know there was a regular episode coming up soon. We just didn't want to delay talking about this for another week on top of it and then start running into the issues with Sadistic September. So I actually do have a recommendation, by the way, for us to add into. And this is going to be just long enough. This is just a Susan of a series for us to talk about.
It's just the amount of Alice in Wonderland that you put in Alice in Borderland.
just a little sprinkle over the top. Nick, we get told a lot that we don't review enough comedies. That's what everybody's saying. We don't talk about them enough. Yeah, that's what people are like. They're like, you guys with your battle manga and your sexy harem manga and everything like that. You want something that's just gonna make people laugh and whatnot. Which is I'm trying to find the series in the list so I can give the person who named it, and I can't fucking find it.
Listen, Alice in Borderland has plenty of yucks in it. Okay, remember that time when that person died because they didn't play by the rules? That was hilarious.
All right, now I have to fucking search it up in the goddamn document. I know it was in here.
Remember
There
that random ass Jack of Hearts game where one of the guys who won was just fucking that lady and she was totally loyal to him because he just dominated her completely. Remember that?
Yeah. Good times.
That guy got to live.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's honestly, that is actually a thing. I thought that the only reason to keep those two alive is to say, okay, the Borderlands are going to continue because these two fuckers are going to stay around to create the next round of sadistic games. But both of them are Hearts players, so I guess they're just both going to make shitty Hearts games that no one wants to play. So, like, it's like we saw like some crazy intelligent person who stayed around. You're like, oh, that's the next round to die. No, it's just two fucking sadistic dickheads, a serial killer and a CEO. Or like, I guess you can, because there's a lot of the series that also deals with like the decline of Japan. So like, I guess you could also justify like the idea of like a capitalist and an insane person are like the two evils that will continue to perpetuate. But I was like, one of those is not the same level as the other one. Like,
yeah, a serial killer only kills individuals.
yeah, exactly. He doesn't kill the soul. Can't kill that unless you're fucking making pay. Anyway, we're gonna be reading The Way of the House Husband. This is a recommendation. Floking Around was the initial recommended person, and I've read a good chunk of this series. It is a super quick read. It is basically, what if everything I was worried about when Sakamoto Days came out came to be true? That's the easiest way I can describe it. So stay tuned for that, everybody.
All right, y'all. That's going to do it. We'll see you next time for Weekly Manga Recap.
Oh, well, I guess real quick, we should, because this episode will have a title card. I want to thank Steve Mann, our title card artist, who drew a very awesome title.
Yay!
Yeah, thank you, Steve Mann. You can find out his work at twitter.com/SteveMannArt. So go check out his stuff. Bye.
Also,
Nope. You said something. No, I haven't hit stop yet.
Wednesday Dale Shedder and Milo Jack Stillis for the opening of
That is true.
Recap.
That'll be there as well. All right. And thanks to Ninja X3i for putting together the Google Doc and everything that goes along with it. All right, goodbye now. You can't stop us now.